My name is Tessa, and the day my parents left me at a bus station in Central Texas was the day I stopped pretending they loved me. We were coming back from a weekend trip to visit my older sister, and everything felt like it always did: tight smiles, fake laughter, and a quiet tension humming underneath every word. When Dad pulled into the dusty station lot and told me to get him a bottle of water, I didn't question it. I walked over to the vending machines like I always did. Head down, shoulders tucked in. I didn't expect the car to be gone when I turned around. I stood there blinking, the heat thick around me, trying to convince myself they'd just parked somewhere else. Maybe to get gas or stretch their legs. Then my phone buzzed. One text. No explanation. No joke. Just a sentence that burned itself into my brain. Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider it a test. I don't remember if I cried right away, but I remember how quiet it got. Like the world had gone still, just for me to hear the weight of that silence. It wasn't the first time something like this happened. When I was 13, they locked me outside during a thunderstorm because I forgot to clean the bathroom. At 14, they made me walk 5 miles home in the snow for missing the school bus. They called them lessons, character builders. But all they taught me was that love could be conditional and punishment could wear a smile. Standing there at that bus station, I knew they weren't coming back. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. It was the kind of knowing that doesn't leave room for hope. And maybe that was the most painful part, not that they left, but that I wasn't even surprised. I had $62 in my wallet and a half-dead phone. I sat on the bench for a while, watching strangers move in and out of the station like the world kept turning just fine without me. It did. It always had. But I didn't want to go back. Not even if they did show up an hour later, claiming it was some twisted joke. I didn't want to be their lesson anymore. I called one person. My Aunt Lena. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since she stopped coming to Christmas, because of something my mother said. I didn't even know if the number still worked. But when she picked up, all I had to say was I need help. She didn't ask questions. She just told me where to meet her. That night, I slept on her couch in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. It smelled like detergent and stale pizza. I have never felt safer. That was the first night I didn't listen for footsteps outside my door. Didn't flinch at every sound. It was the first night I realized I was completely alone, and still, somehow, completely free. It would take years for that feeling to feel normal. Years of second jobs, night classes, and people not believing my story because parents don't just leave their kids behind. But mine did. And I never went back. I was 17 when I learned what family meant. It wasn't who raised you. It was who picked up when you called. And I would spend every day after that trying to become someone they couldn't touch. Someone they couldn't rewrite. Because the truth is, I wasn't lost. I was finally starting to find my way. I stayed with Aunt Lena for almost a year. Her apartment was small, and always a little too warm. But it felt like a shelter in a world that had shown me nothing but cold. She didn't ask about my parents. And I didn't offer anything. We both knew silence was safer than reopening wounds we hadn't healed yet. She worked long hours at the diner down the street, and let me help fold napkins and wipe tables in exchange for dinner. I started picking up odd jobs after school stocking shelves. Babysitting for neighbors. Tutoring a freshman who couldn't figure out algebra. Every dollar I made felt like a brick I was laying to build a life no one could take from me. When I wasn't working, I studied. Hard. I knew my only way out of that couch, out of that cramped apartment, out of that town, was to win something bigger than what I had. I carried my textbooks everywhere. And when I didn't understand something, I'd stay up until I did. Failure wasn't an option. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have a home to return to. My high school counselor, Mrs. Collier. It was the first person at school who looked at me like I wasn't broken. She noticed how I kept showing up early and staying late. How I volunteered for extra credit, even when I didn't need it. One afternoon, She asked me if I'd ever considered applying for a scholarship. I told her no. I didn't think people like me got those. She smiled and said, "Maybe it's time someone like you did." We spent weeks going through applications together. I wrote more essays than I could count. Each one a little piece of my story that I folded carefully into words someone might read and believe in. I didn't write about the bus station or the text or the door slamming behind me at 13. I wrote about resilience. About building a life from scraps. About learning to trust the people who showed up when it mattered. I still remember the day the letter came. It was a full ride. Tuition. Housing. Books. Meals. Everything. I reread it 3 times before letting myself believe it. Aunt Lena cried when I told her. Not the loud kind of crying, but the quiet kind where her shoulders shook while she kept washing dishes like nothing happened. That fall, I moved into a dorm at a small university outside Denver. It wasn't glamorous. The mattress was thin. The shared bathroom always smelled like bleach. And my roommate liked to play music way too loud. But it was mine. It was the first space in my life that felt like it belonged to me alone. College was hard. I didn't have parents to call when I was sick or homesick. I couldn't afford spring breaks or weekend trips. While other students worried about finals, I worried about whether I could stretch my meal plan to last through the month. But every time I thought about quitting, I pictured that bus station. I remembered what it felt like to be disposable. And that pushed me further than anything else ever could. I worked 2 jobs during the semester and 3 during the summer. I interned. Cleaned offices. Ran spreadsheets. Delivered food. I said yes to everything. Because I didn't know which yes would open a door I couldn't afford to miss. My professors started to notice. So did my internship supervisors. People started saying things like, "You're going to do big things and you've got something different in you." In my final year, I was offered a spot in a graduate business program. Fully funded. With a stipend. I accepted before the words even finished leaving the dean's mouth. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. When I finally graduated, I stood on that stage in borrowed heels and a thrifted gown. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I had job offers. Real ones. I had a place to live. And most of all, I had a version of myself. I was proud of one who didn't flinch at praise. Didn't second-guess every decision. Didn't feel like she owed the world an apology for existing. I moved into a small apartment in downtown Denver and started working at a real estate firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And it let me learn the ropes. The office overlooked a row of trees that turned gold in the fall. And every morning I'd take the long way in just to walk under them. It reminded me how far I'd come. No one from my family ever showed up during those years. No messages. No birthdays. No questions. At first, that hurt more than I admitted. But over time, the silence became a gift. I filled it with new voices. Friends who stayed. Mentors who encouraged me. People who saw me for who I was. Not who I failed to be. By 25, I started my own company. Small. Scrappy. But mine. I called it Northlight Properties. Because I liked the way sunlight looked in the morning when it came from the north windows of my new office. That name reminded me that even cold light can still be light. And through all of it, through the night shifts, the missed holidays, to the loneliness, I never forgot what it felt like to be 17, with nowhere to go. That version of me still lived somewhere inside. Not as a wound, but as a compass. A reminder of the girl who kept walking when no one came looking. It started with a missed call. Then 2. Then 8. I didn't recognize the number at first. And I wouldn't have answered even if I did. I had a rule: if you left me in the past, that's where you stayed. I let them go to voicemail. One after another. My phone buzzed through meetings. Lunches. And late nights at the office. I muted it. Focused on what I could control: budgets. Closings. New hires. My company was finally turning a profit. I had just signed my third commercial building downtown. And for once, I wasn't treading water. I was swimming. But curiosity has teeth. Late one night, after I'd finished reviewing invoices, I opened the voicemail app. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe closure. Maybe an apology. Maybe something I could finally delete. The first one was from my sister. Melissa. Her voice was soft. Careful. Almost like she was afraid I'd hang up on a recording. She said our parents were going through something, that they were looking for me. She said they'd changed. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. They hadn't changed. They had just remembered I existed. The next few messages came from unknown numbers. Heavy breathing. A man's voice I hadn't heard in over a decade, my father's. He sounded older. Slower. Like life had caught up to him. Still. The words were sharp. You think you're better than us now? You think that degree makes you somebody. We gave you everything. I paused the message. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what was worse, that he believed it. Or that he thought I might. More messages followed. Some angry. Some oddly polite. My mother's voice drifted in like a ghost from another life. She talked about family. About forgiveness. About how hard things had gotten. How they were in debt. How Dad had made some bad investments. How they just needed a little help. Just enough to get back on their feet. She didn't say sorry. Not once. I stared at my phone like it was something toxic. It buzzed again. A text this time. From Melissa. Just 3 lines. They need you. They're your parents. Please. That word used to mean something to me. Parents. But these weren't the people who sat up with me when I had a fever or cheered me on at school plays. They were the ones who abandoned me at a bus station and called it discipline. The ones who disappeared the second I stopped being useful. I took a walk. Denver in the fall always smells like wood smoke and dry leaves. It was the kind of night I used to dream about, back when I was crashing on Aunt Lena's couch, clear. Cool. Quiet. I walked past restaurants full of families. Warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Laughter. Dishes clinking. Lives I didn't belong to. When I got back to my apartment, I opened the last voicemail. It was short. Just my dad. Clipped and bitter. We made you. You wouldn't have that fancy job if it weren't for us. You owe us. I sat on the edge of my bed. The phone still in my hand. My reflection stared back at me from the window, tired. Composed. Sharper than I remembered. That girl they left behind didn't owe them anything. And the woman she became certainly didn't. I didn't reply. Not that night. Not for weeks. But the messages didn't stop. Melissa kept reaching out. First gently. Then urgently. Then passive-aggressively. She said I was being cruel. That I didn't understand what they were going through. That family sticks together. I typed out a dozen responses. Deleted all of them. The truth was, I did understand what they were going through. I understood desperation. I understood survival. I had lived it. Alone. And still. Some part of me wondered what I'd say if I saw them again. Would I freeze? Would I yell? Would I crumble under the weight of memories I thought I'd buried for good? I didn't have the answer. But I knew one thing: if they were coming back into my life, it wasn't because they missed me. It was because they needed something, and I had built too much, bled too much, to hand any of it over now. That was the day I changed my number. Blocked the calls. Blocked the guilt. I owed them silence. Nothing more. Tessa arrived early at the small diner on the edge of town. The kind with flickering neon signs and vinyl booths worn from years of spilled coffee and whispered secrets. She chose a booth by the window, hands folded tightly on the table. Heart steady, but guarded. When Melissa walked in, her eyes scanned the room nervously before settling on Tessa with a mixture of relief and hesitation. Melissa slid into the booth across from her, fingers trembling as she pushed the laminated menu aside. She started talking about their parents, how they were drowning in debt. how everything was falling apart. She spoke softly, almost pleading, asking Tessa to consider helping them. Just this once. To keep the family from falling apart. But Tessa's gaze didn't soften. Instead, she leaned forward, voice measured and cold as ice. She reminded Melissa of the years of silence, the nights waiting for a call that never came, the time she was left alone to fend for herself. Then she said something that hung heavy between them. Melissa had known about the plan to abandon her all along. She had chosen not to act. Melissa's face drained of color, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. The weight of unspoken guilt filled the space, thicker than the morning fog outside. She tried to explain, to say it was complicated, that they thought Tessa would come back. But Tessa cut her off, her words sharp and unwavering. She was done waiting for apologies that would never come. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a few bills and placing them on the table not as help, but as a final farewell. If their parents tried to reach out again, she warned Melissa, she wouldn't be polite next time. Without another word, Tessa stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor, and walked out before the silence could choke them both. Outside, the cold morning air hit her like a fresh wound. But inside, there was clarity. The family she thought she had was gone. And so was any hope of reconciliation. From that day forward, Tessa knew the path ahead was hers alone to walk. The posts started small, quiet whispers on social media threads with vague accusations and shadowy hints. But soon, they exploded into full-blown stories painted by my parents as the cruel daughter who abandoned her family in their darkest hour. Pictures of empty chairs at family dinners, faded childhood photos, and desperate pleas for forgiveness flooded the internet, each post twisting the truth a little more. Comments poured in fast and furious, strangers piling on without knowing the whole story. Ungrateful, selfish, heartless words thrown around like stones. I watched as followers of my company's page questioned my character, calling me a liar and a fraud, blaming me for tearing apart my own family. Inside my office, the weight of those words settled heavily on my shoulders. My team exchanged worried glances. Some whispered doubts, audible when they thought I wasn't listening. Clients hesitated. Some pulled back. The world I had fought so hard to build suddenly felt fragile and exposed. I sat alone one evening, scrolling through threads filled with accusations I couldn't respond to without making things worse. Each message was a reminder that despite the truth, perception could be weaponized against you. I felt the sting of betrayal all over again, not just from my family, but from a society quick to judge and slow to listen. Yet, beneath the shock and hurt, a small voice reminded me why I had come this far. To stay silent would mean surrender. I clenched my fists, knowing the battle was no longer just personal, it was a fight for my reputation, my company, and my peace of mind. I was about to find out how far I was willing to go to reclaim my story. On a gray morning that seemed like any other, my phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. There was an elderly couple waiting in the lobby, insisting they needed to see me. I already knew who they were before I even stepped through the office doors. My parents stood there like actors on a stage, their eyes glistening with carefully rehearsed tears. My mother clutched a crumpled tissue, sobbing about how I had abandoned them in their time of need. My father crossed his arms, scanning the room as if daring anyone to question their story. Employees whispered among themselves, some reaching for their phones to capture the spectacle. Strangers passing by glanced curiously. The scene unfolding like a live drama, I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and forced my face into a mask of calm. I approached them steadily, voice low but firm, telling them if they didn't leave immediately, I would have security escort them out. My father stepped forward, voice dropping to a venomous hiss, accusing me of forgetting where I came from, claiming that everything I had was because of them. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stared straight into their eyes and said they were nothing to me. My mother dropped to her knees, tears flowing freely as she accused me of cruelty and heartlessness. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, some feeling sympathy, others discomfort. Security moved in quietly but decisively. I watched as they were led out, their voices fading through the glass doors. The whole ordeal left a cold hollow inside me. But beneath that, a fierce fire was burning. They had tried to manipulate me in front of everyone. But I wasn't the same girl they left behind. I was stronger. I was ready. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and official-looking, its weight heavier than the paper it was printed on. My assistant placed it carefully on my desk. Her eyes clouded with concern as she mentioned it was from a law firm. I already knew before I opened it. The name at the top confirmed my suspicion. My parents had filed a lawsuit against me. They claimed I was neglecting my filial responsibilities. That, after all these years, I owed them financial support. The irony was suffocating. These were the same people who left me stranded, who vanished the moment I needed them most, now demanding payment as if abandoning a child granted them ownership. I called my lawyer, David. Immediately, as I read the complaint aloud, I could hear his sigh on the other end. He explained the complexities of filial responsibility laws, how some states enforce them more strictly than others, and how Texas, while not the harshest, I could still present challenges if my parents pursued this aggressively. David advised caution, but also encouraged transparency. He suggested that I take control of the narrative by going public with my story, sharing the full truth, the history they wanted to bury. It was a bold move, one that could risk backlash, but also had the power to turn public opinion in my favor. I spent hours pacing my office, weighing the risks and the possibilities. The thought of reliving those memories was painful, but the idea of surrendering to their demands was unbearable. I had spent too long hiding, protecting myself in silence. Finally, I made my decision. I wasn't going to be a victim any longer. I was going to fight back, not just in the courtroom but in the court of public opinion. I told David to prepare for battle, and that I wanted to tell my story on my terms. That night, I drafted a statement, a raw, unfiltered account of everything. The abandonment, the struggle, the fight to build a life from nothing. I didn't hold back. I shared my truth because silence was no longer an option. I hit send on the post and waited, heart pounding but resolute. This was the turning point. The moment I stopped running from my past and started owning it, whatever came next. I was ready. I sat in front of the camera, the room dim, except for the soft glow of the ring light. My hands trembled for a moment before steadying as I took a deep breath. Then, I began to speak, not just to tell a story, but to reclaim my voice. I spoke of the bus station where my parents left me at 17, of the countless nights spent wondering if I was forgotten. I shared the years of struggle, the jobs I worked just to keep my head above water, the scholarships earned through sheer determination. I told the truth about the calls and messages that came years later, not because of love or regret, but because of desperation and debt. The video wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about honesty. I wanted people to know the real story, the one my family tried to erase. I wanted to show that healing comes from truth, even when it's hard to say out loud. Within hours, the video began to spread. Comments poured in, filled with support and empathy. Strangers shared their own stories of abandonment and resilience. The tide of public opinion shifted dramatically. The same people who had condemned me now expressed outrage at my parents' actions. News outlets picked up the story, and the conversation exploded across social media. My family, once trying to control the narrative, found themselves exposed and isolated. Their reputations crumbled as the truth unfolded. But I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't seek to humiliate. What I gained was something far more precious: freedom. Freedom from guilt. From silence. From the weight of a past that was never mine to carry alone. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just telling my story, I was helping others find the courage to tell theirs. I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. A peace that comes when you finally let the truth set you free. This wasn't the end of my journey, but it was a powerful beginning, and I was ready to walk forward. No longer defined by what they had done, but by who I chose to become. Melissa showed up on my doorstep weeks after everything went viral. Eyes swollen and voice barely above a whisper. She begged me to help them. To forgive. To remember that they were still family. But I wasn't cold. Just certain. I told her that I wasn't lost to anger or bitterness, I was lost to survival. I had chosen myself. I explained that love isn't just about bloodlines or shared names. It's about who stands by you when the world turns its back. And they had chosen to walk away long before I ever did. I didn't owe them peace. And they certainly didn't deserve my sacrifice. After she left, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering softly beneath the darkening sky. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Aunt Lena, the only person who had ever truly seen me. Dinner this weekend. I wrote, my treat. As I leaned back on the balcony chair, the cool breeze brushed against my skin, carrying away the weight of years I thought I'd never shed. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt at home within myself. I watched the city breathe under the night sky, knowing that peace wasn't something given, it was something I claimed. And I had claimed it at last.